All right, everyone. So for our second webinar series, we're going to be speaking to Dr. Joe Pizzorno. Now, Joe's been involved in natural medicine for more than half a century, and he was actually appointed by the White House Commission on Alternative Medicine Policy by President Clinton in December of 2000, and to the Medicare Coverage Advisory Committee by the Bush administration in November of 2002. Amazing stuff. So he's the founding president of Bastyr University and the chief editor-in-chief of Integrative Medicine. And Joe's book, The Toxic Solution, which is a lot of the reason why we wanted to talk to you about all of this stuff, the toxic overload that we have in our system, is really a guide to seeing how toxins are in your life, how they're affecting you, and how they're connected to diseases. And I see it over there in the background. So really cool, amazing stuff. So Joe, I guess the way I want to start this is I want everyone to understand how important is it for us to start living a low toxin life? Because a lot of us don't talk about it. It's definitely not in the collective consciousness. You're not going to your PCP and they're going, well, let's talk about your toxins. How do we reduce that load? But how important is it?
That's a great question. And I think that when I say we, I'm talking about kind of us as a scientific clinical community, have under-recognized the significance of toxins in causing disease in people. And I think we've been so unappreciative because so much of the research was based on looking at single toxins at a time. So we look at one toxin and then decide at what threshold does it start causing disease, clearly identifiable disease, and then we say, okay, as long as you're below that level, you're okay. Well, that's fine for one toxin, but based on the research I've looked at, there are now about 100 metals and chemicals in the environment at pretty significant levels. Now, whereas one of them may not reach quite the quote threshold for the general population, there's always going to be a certain portion of the population above that threshold. But more importantly, when you've got 5 or 6 or 10 or 50 toxins just below the threshold, well, they start interacting with each other. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden now you start getting all this disease because, yeah, if you don't have one toxin, you can take care of it. But as you know, for example, glutathione is critical in the body for helping get rid of toxins and decreasing their damage. Well, if you use up all your glutathione and get rid of one toxin, well, how about all those other toxins you're being exposed to? Now there's no glutathione there anymore. Mm-hmm. Now they're way more toxic. So I started looking at the research on toxins and disease, and I was stunned by what I found. The one which I looked at the most was diabetes. I think we're all aware we're suffering now a diabetes epidemic. When I looked at the research on diabetes, about 20 years ago, diabetes accounted for about 1 out of 7 healthcare dollars being spent. Now it accounts for about 25% of healthcare dollars being spent. 1 out of every $4 is on diabetes. When I was in naturopathic medical school half a century ago, diabetes affected 0.5% of the population. Now it affects about 10% of the population, and 1/3 of people are projected to get diabetes sometime in their lifetime. So what happened? And when I started looking at the research, the first thing I looked at, of course, was sugar. You know, everybody knows sugar's not good for you, but the sugar consumption does not correlate with diabetes, which I was very surprised by that. Then I looked at, well, are there other factors? And obesity is a real big factor. As a matter of fact, people who are morbidly obese, in general, they tend to either have diabetes already or will be getting it pretty soon. Best predictor conventionally of diabetes is being obese. But then I found a stunning study by a researcher out of South Korea by the name of Ducky Lee, and she determined that obese people in the bottom 20% of body load of environmental toxins don't have an increased risk for diabetes. And lean people in the top 20% of body load for environmental toxins have about a 10-fold increased risk for diabetes. I started looking at these various toxins and said, wait a minute, so more toxins, more diabetes, why is that? And you start looking at mechanisms of action, and we find is many of these chemicals we're being exposed to bind to receptor sites, so that we now have metabolic syndrome, which means the pancreas has to overproduce insulin, get sugar into the body. After a while it burns out, you got diabetes. And these toxins directly poison the pancreas. So you look at mechanism after mechanism, not only do we know that when people are exposed to toxins, they have more risk of diabetes, we now know why it's happening. Long answer to your short question.
Which is amazing, because how often is that part of the dialogue that we have on diabetes? I mean, if it was part of the dialogue, or we understood, then a lot of us would be making major policy shifts onto how we're exposed to these toxins. When it comes to these toxins, how are we being most exposed? Because you mentioned it's not just one, it's the synergy of how they're all working together, which is hard to study in itself, right? We study chemicals in a vacuum.
Yes.
Which ones are we really needing to look out for? You know, let's say there's some of us watching this right now, never heard of any of these toxins. Which ones are the ones we need to watch out for and really make a play at?
Good question. And I'm going to talk about two of them that I think are so important they should be part of the standard of care, their assessment. So you go to your doctor, and your doctor does a CBC, checks your cholesterol, maybe does a blood panel, looking for disease. I think that the standard of care should now include screening for at least 2 toxins and adding 1 laboratory test. So let's talk about those. Number 1 is lead. You might be saying, wait a minute, we banned lead in gasoline way back in the 70s, and we got rid of lead in solder and paint and things like that in the 80s. Why is that a problem? Well, remember, most of the older population, particularly those with disease, they form their bones when there's a lot of lead in the environment. So when they go through andropause and menopause, they start releasing lead from the bones. So a group of researchers started looking at, well, could they determine what % of chronic disease and even the death rate is due to lead? And they did a bunch of research, came up with just stunning numbers. Number 1, 18% of all-cause mortality is due to lead. Are you aware of any other factor that accounts for almost 1 out of 5 deaths?
Wow.
And then they looked at death from cardiovascular events, heart attack. 1/3 of heart attacks due to lead. So shouldn't we be testing everybody for lead? Because if their lead is elevated, it's going to kill them. Next one is arsenic. You might say, wait a minute, arsenic? That's not a problem, is it? Well, it turns out that 1/3 of the major cancers are apparently due to arsenic. You say, well, wait a minute, how do you get arsenic? Well, 10% of the public water supplies that have reported their results have arsenic levels known to induce disease in humans. Well, that's interesting. Notice I said very carefully that have reported their results. Only half of the public water supplies in the United States have reported their arsenic levels. Why is that? This is a $50 test. Okay, we can get a little paranoid there if you want to. Okay, so now we've got this arsenic in the water, and we used to intentionally add arsenic to chicken feed because it helps control parasites in chickens and made them grow a little plumper. Oh, that's worrisome. And it turns out that rice, if it's grown in water that's contaminated with arsenic, which is surprisingly common, for some reason arsenic is very effectively absorbed into rice. So now we're seeing a lot of water supplies have arsenic in them. People eat a lot of chicken, even though it's no longer approved. Still plenty of these farms still put arsenic into it. And if they're not intentionally putting arsenic in, well, the grounds are saturated with arsenic. And then we've got the situation of rice. You don't have to put your arsenic levels on the rice. So then when you look at the level of arsenic in the body that's known to be correlated with more disease, cancer, stroke, diabetes, the big ones that really hurt people, you look at what level of arsenic in the body results in those diseases. Turns out that 1/3 of Americans are above the threshold for increased risk of these diseases.
Wow.
So right there, just 2 toxins. And there's a third test I recommend, and that's a standard liver enzyme called GGTP or GGT. So this enzyme used to be measured as part of standard blood screen because when people have hepatitis, their liver cells get damaged and they start leaking enzymes into the blood. So you see like the high levels of enzymes in the blood, hepatitis. Well, other enzymes turned out to be more effective at detecting hepatitis and making sure it's in the liver, not kidneys somewhere else. That test got dropped from the general screen. However, it should be put back in again. Because what is that test? That test measures the rate of recycling of glutathione in the body. So when the body needs more glutathione, the liver produces more of this enzyme, and so just a little bit more of it leaks into the blood. So within the quote normal range, GTT goes up in proportion to exposure to lead, mercury, PCBs, phthalates, all these toxins we're being exposed to. Because we need glutathione to get rid of them, our body produces more, our wonderful bodies. So we should be adding GTT to the test and not using the standard range of 10 to 60. Okay, well, we're not looking for hepatitis, we're looking for dysfunction. It turns out anything above 25 is indicative of toxic load.
Wow.
And GTT correlates with diabetes. So someone with a GTT between 40 and 60, normal range, has a 20-fold increased risk for diabetes. Anybody with a GTT above 30 has an 8-fold increased risk of diabetes. So the GTT is telling us this person is being exposed to toxins. It doesn't tell us which toxins, but it tells us we better start looking.
Amazing take homes, right? This is something that someone can ask their doctor for, and how empowering it is that there's already 3 tests that they can add on, hopefully, and then get a really better look at how their toxic load looks. When it comes to the lead and the arsenic, should folks listening ask for blood and lead arsenic, or are they doing hair test? What's the best way to do it?
Yeah, that is a big challenge. What we want to know is the level of these things in the tissues. But what we're only able to measure realistically is what's in the blood, what's in the urine. So it turns out urinary arsenic is actually a good measure of urinary arsenic exposure. Okay, so that's just fine. Lead is much more difficult because blood lead primarily reflects current exposure. It doesn't reflect how much is in the bone very well. So there's various techniques that have been used, like challenge testing, things like this, to get a better measure of how much lead's in the bone. But it's really controversial. At this point, I would say just get your lead in your blood and your lead and your arsenic in your urine, but you have to use a lower level for your threshold. If you use a lower level, then they're actually pretty good indication of there being a problem.
Amazing stuff. And you mentioned these 2 important toxins. How do you feel about BPA and phthalates? Do you feel that that's really important to be testing also? Is that maybe a tier 2 test for you? What do you think?
So yes, there are a lot of these other things that we should be measuring, like BPA and phthalates, things of this nature. But when we're talking about BPA, bisphenol A, the people involved in environmental medicine are saying you've got to look at the total bisphenols, not just bisphenol A. Because now the manufacturers are saying, oh yeah, we have bisphenol A free plastic. Well, it's got bisphenol S and bisphenol F and bisphenol Z. And if you look at the animal research, they're actually more toxic than bisphenol A. You have to look at total bisphenols. And the reality is that the only way to get your bisphenols down is to stop exposure. And that means stop plastics, stop being exposed to plastics. Get rid of all the plastic containers in your house. Don't buy anything that's in a can, any food that's in a can. If you're going to buy food that's in plastic, get out of plastic and into glass containers as soon as possible. Don't use plastic shower curtains. Don't use health and beauty aids that have phthalates in them. We're constantly exposed to these. So the good news is that these bisphenols and phthalates have short half-lives. That means they're what we're called non-persistent toxins. If you stop exposing yourself to them, within a few days, they're all gone. Arsenic's the same way. Stop exposing yourself to arsenic, within a few days, it's gone. The problem is stopping the exposure, and that is really tricky.
So when it comes to, and you mentioned then avoiding a lot of them in food because, we're watching those canned goods, staying away from the plastic water bottles. But then it brings the topic of air. There's also things that we breathe in. How are we to avoid toxins in the air? I mean, that seems kind of hard, especially me living in Los Angeles. I feel like the air is more toxic outside than it is in here. Yes. So what are some of the moves that we can make to start avoiding that?
Yeah, a great question. And to give you an idea of how important it is, people living within 50 feet of a freeway have a 50% increased risk of cardiovascular disease. 50%. You might say, well, 50 feet, that's not very far. Have you driven down the freeway lately? You looked at all those high-rise apartment buildings?
Right there.
Right there. Within 100 yards, 17% increased risk of cardiovascular disease. Okay, that's just heart disease. So you've got to make the air in your house clean. If you've got a whole house air filtration or forced air system, then you want to put a MERV 12 or better air filter in your forced air system. And we have a MERV 16. And while it works it's remarkable how well it works. So for example, we've had all those fires in the West Coast. Well, inside our house, you don't smell the smoke. Open the door, you smell the smoke. It works pretty well. Dust, just dramatically decrease the amount of dust in our house. Now, if you don't have a forced air heating system, then you want to get the HEPA filters and put the HEPA filter in every room that you're in frequently. Another thing to do is take off your shoes when you enter the house. Turns out on the shoes are a lot of toxins. There was a study that was done where they looked at 2 houses. One was it was a little atypical in that it was in a farming community. Okay, so it's going to be more pesticides and crap in the dust than there's other areas. But they looked at houses where all they did was take off the shoes before entering the house, and they decreased people's body load of the toxins that were in the environment by 50%. So of the air toxins. So just take off your shoes. It's really helpful.
That's a great move. And how about for folks who don't have the whole house filtration system? Are there any portable air filters that you like or really think that are the best out there?
Yeah, the HEPA filters.
Just any HEPA ones. That's what we have to go
There's
for.
been some variation between them. I'm trying to avoid any commercial entanglements, so I'm not recommending to particular group. But look at one where they've actually measured how effective they are to get rid of the toxins, and if properly made, they are very effective.
Cool. Okay, great.
But having said that, we had HEPA filters and good quality ones. They're expensive in our bedrooms, in our kitchen, in our family room. But when we put in the whole house MERV 16 filter, dramatically better, way more effective.
That, which is good for folks who are looking to become new homeowners or already own a home. That might be the next move that they can make.
It's a worthwhile investment.
It's worthwhile. Okay. What about water? You mentioned that we get some of these chemicals in the water. Is there a type of filtration system that we need in our house that can really start reducing this toxic load for us too?
So I recommend that you go to where the water comes into the house from the city water supply and put a carbon block filter in that water supply. Because it turns out, people think about drinking water as a source of toxins, and it is, much of the toxins we're getting is from the toxins being released when we're in a hot shower. Because when we're in a hot shower, it volatilizes the toxins, we inhale it, and we're much more efficient at absorbing toxins when we inhale them than when we consume them digestively.
It's no one thinks about that, right? How many people actually love getting into a hot shower, steaming up the whole room? So are you suggesting then getting a filter for the shower as well as?
Well, yeah. So if you only do single use locations, then yes, get a filter for the shower.
Okay.
Now, if you want to get more sophisticated, you can also get metal precipitators with these, so they'll get rid of any lead that's in the water and arsenic, things like that. Arsenic is a little hard to get rid of. You pretty much need a reverse osmosis, but even a carbon block filter will get rid of some of the arsenic.
Okay, and just water filtration systems for everyday drinking, you're thinking carbon is a really good...
It gets rid of the chemicals quite well. Not as good with the metals, but it does get rid of the chemicals.
Okay, versus a reverse osmosis, is that one?
Reverse osmosis is best.
But
it's just way more expensive. It's more of a hassle.
So how about you? Have you changed your kitchen up to decrease the toxic exposure? What can some of us start doing in our kitchen where a lot of us spend our time?
Yes, we've actually been working at that really hard. And I just remarked with my wife a few days ago. I'm curious to see what the long-term benefits are going to be. What I mean by that is, okay, so we got rid of our plastic containers in the house. There's no plastic containers whatsoever. We have all glass. Okay, well, that took care of the bisphenol A and some of the phthalates. Then we got rid of all the non-stick coatings pans in our house. The Teflon coat and things like this. Well, the PFASs, these are the Teflon compounds, the half-life in the body is typically around 4 years. Okay, so it takes 4 half-lives to get totally out of the body. So we were really good about it started about 4 years ago. So we've already cut out about half of it. So we still have another half to go. So I'm curious to see how well we're doing with that. So non-stick coating's gone, all the plastics gone, are gone. Then the other one are the cleaning agents in the house. So a lot of the cleaning agents have a lot of chemicals in them. So my wife got very clever and she put together a solution which is water, white vinegar, and she puts in a few drops of lavender oil. Okay.
Perfect.
Nice and clean. Cleans everything up. House smells nice. If you don't like lavender, use a different one. Doesn't put in all solvents, things like that. Works quite well.
Mm-hmm. And cheap. You know, you can make those DIYs cleaners, they can go so far and be so effective. So I love that we can do that, and it's super actionable, which is really easy.
Yes.
So how about you? I know when we were traveling, you were traveling a lot. You were doing a lot of talks. How do you reduce your toxic load when you're traveling? It's very different than, the safety of a clean home. But what are some of the things we can do when we want to start traveling to protect ourselves as well?
That's a great question. I have not been in an airplane now for 9 months, and I'm stunned how much healthier I am. Okay. I was getting more and more concerned about the damaging effects of travel, because I was noticing as I was getting cleaner and cleaner at home that when I did, like I did a bunch of lectures in Moscow, for example. So I get to Moscow, it's almost 24 hours to travel. It's really hard to get there from Seattle. As a matter of fact, it's a 12-hour time zone, so it's kind of on the other side of the world. It would take me 3 or 4 days before I got my normal energy back because I was being exposed to toxins. So then I started saying, okay, now what can I do? So I now bring all my own health and beauty aids. So I bring my own shampoo and such, so get rid of that. I bring a lot of my own food now. So I bring my organic food so that I know that's safe. But I can't control the air, and there's a limit to what I can do in the water. And airplanes used to be really toxic. I think they're less toxic now because of the COVID-19 cleanup. I think maybe the air is cleaner in the airplanes, but it's hard. It's hard to do. So I bring as much of my stuff with me as I can.
Yeah, and maybe some. Do you bring any supplements to support your liver or detoxification as well?
The two which I do quite regularly are vitamin C and N-acetylcysteine.
Okay.
So you can do more sophisticated things, but just 500 milligrams of vitamin C twice a day, 500 milligrams of NAC twice a day really supports our detox systems quite well.
Yeah, I agree. There's every time I'm doing like 3 weeks of traveling, I come back and I feel so sick and run down, and partly because of the time difference, but I really think that it wears on you, especially when people like us, we make sure we make interventions to clean our lives up. When we are exposed, I truly feel that you really feel it.
Absolutely. I was noticing that. It just occurred to me when I started Bastyr, over 40 years ago. Since I started Bastyr, I've been on the road 1 week out of every month. I travel about 100,000 miles a year. Okay, wow. So that's a lot of toxic exposure. So now, while I'm happy to continue lecturing, I would be doing more and more Zoom lecturing because I want to take care of myself.
For sure. And we might as well nurture our health, and this is the time to do it. So what a blessing in disguise this year has been for you especially. Thank you, Dr. Joe Pizzorno. This was really amazing information. I know the audience is going to be super empowered. I mean, the fact that we now have things that we can ask our doctor to test us for is amazing, but also these interventions that we can do in our life every single day. What a blessing. And I thank you for your time and your knowledge. This is amazing stuff.
Well, thank you. Great that you're doing this important work.
Thank you.